I think it's much more appropriate to have Russia in. It should be the G8 because a lot of the things we talk about have to do with Russia.
Welcome back. That was President Trump today expressing support for Russia returning to the G8. It's not the first time he has said this. It's, of course, not the first time that he's pushed for more normalized relations with Russia. But this time it is happening as there are concerns about a renewed arms race with Russia. For the first time in decades, the U.S. military has tested an intermediate-range cruise missile. The Department of Defense released this slow-motion video of the missile, which the Pentagon says flew 300 miles to hit its target. That kind of launch was banned by the Cold War-era treaty signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev back in 1987. But the U.S. pulled out of that agreement earlier this month. The U.S. test comes just days after an explosion at a Russian missile test site that killed at least 7 people there. An explosion that we are still struggling to gather information about, but that the U.S. officials believe was caused by nuclear missile testing. MSNBC national security analyst and former Pentagon Russia expert Evelyn Farkas joins me now. Evelyn, thank you for taking a few minutes. Well, let me ask you about what the president said today. Not the first time he said it, but the idea of bringing Russia back to the G8. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is to remind you, Steve, well, not you personally, but the world, that the reason Russia was kicked out of the G8 so that it became the G7 was because Russia invaded Ukraine and attempted to illegally seize Ukrainian territory. For the first time since World War II, Russia tried to change the borders in Europe using military force. That was enough for all the other members, European, North American, and Japan, to say, guess what, Russia? You're not welcome here. And that was, of course, before they interfered in our elections. And, of course, Russia's done a lot of other things to break international law. I would add one other quick thing, which is to say, I think if most economists were in the room, they would say that Russia probably doesn't even really qualify to be in the G8 or G7.
So in terms of there's the G8 issue the president raised today, but there's also this question, as we say, of the INF treaty. The U.S. has now formally withdrawn from that. You've got the U.S. with the missile test. Now there's these murky reports out of Russia that they may be trying. This explosion might have been related to them trying to develop a nuclear missile. Is this overhype or is this real, the idea that there's a renewed arms race taking place here?
Yes, Steve. And I think the first part of it, this intermediate nuclear forces missile, this missile that breaks the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which now we said, you know, we withdraw from it. And as you said today, we tested such a treaty that would have actually been a violation had we still been in that treaty. That, as you said, was something that was banned under Reagan. The Soviets Gorbachev joined Reagan banning it. We now have an arms race in the missile category, and unfortunately, this is making things more dangerous for the Europeans. Probably we can manage the military threat through conventional force in Europe. But the Russians have started a new arms race on this issue. As you said, we now tested a weapon, and there's an open question about what happens with the only remaining now arms control treaty, nuclear arms control treaty with Russia, and that's the New START treaty. That limits the overall number of strategic nuclear weapons that we and the Russians can have. And remember, 90% of all nuclear weapons are held by the United States and Russia combined. The other issue, that accident and the other missile that the Russians are testing, that's crazy stuff, because that's basically a doomsday weapon. It's a nuclear weapon fueled by a nuclear reactor. It's very dangerous. It's something the U.S. tried a long time ago. And that betrays some kind of desperation, I would say, on the part of the Russians.
So I guess where is this going then? If the Russians, you suspect there's a motive there of desperation in terms of what the Russians might be up to, and the U.S. is now engaging in tests it wouldn't have in the last 3 years. Where is it all going between the United States and Russia when it comes to this issue of missiles and proliferation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, as you said earlier, Steve, that there's a danger of kind of an arms race, because there's no diplomacy as far as we can tell. And you don't just withdraw from a treaty willy-nilly and don't put some other new negotiation in place. And again, unless there's some secret negotiation going on that we're not aware of, which I don't think is happening, we're not starting a new discussion with Russia. And that's what we should be doing. Now, taking this action and testing a missile could be a prelude to negotiations. We could say to the Russians, hey, do you really want us to deploy this kind of missile somewhere where it can strike Russia, much quicker, the way that you have deployed these missiles in Europe so that you could strike our allies and U.S. forces? And the Russians will say no. Okay, let's sit at the table and talk about it. There is another theater, the Pacific theater, if you will, speaking in military terms, and the Chinese have these weapons. They're conventional mid-range weapons, and we will have to deal with that as well. But taken separately, we should have started a new negotiation with Russia, and certainly the Trump administration should be sending all kinds of loud public signals saying they don't want to walk away from all arms control. They should be renegotiating, because the START treaty, the one that puts the cap on the number of strategic weapons between us and Russia, that will expire in 2020. So we need to get it extended. Or 2021, rather.
I'm curious, too, how do you think all of this is perceived and is processed and understood by Vladimir Putin in Russia, where on the one hand you have the president saying, bring Russia back in, make it the G8 again. You had the president in Helsinki being so friendly towards Putin. And on the other hand, you have the U.S. pulling out of the INF and testing missiles again.
I don't know whether Vladimir Putin fully understands what's going on, who has the power. But what he sees is the president, as always, wanting to go soft on Russia, do whatever Russia wants, and ultimately, of course, what Putin wants is sanctions lifted. And on the other hand, Putin can see very clearly that under the president, there's still a very hard line against Russia.
All right, Evelyn Farkas, thanks for taking a few minutes. We'll be right back.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.